Hey, Slater Crusaders, welcome back to our special on the separation of church and state. So we just spent a good amount of time on the history of this phrase. Let's bring it to present and future times right now. Leah Patterson is here. She's a counsel at the First Liberty Institute. And Lucas Miles, who's from Summit Ministries. He's also author of The Christian Left, How Liberal Thought Has Hijacked the Church, and also Good God, the one we want to embrace in but are afraid to embrace. Leah, Lucas, how are both of you?
Good, how are you?
I'm grateful you guys are both here. Leah, I want to start with you. Liberty First Institute represented Joe Kennedy. He's the high school football coach who prayed at the 50-yard line after each game and then was fired because of it. And the Supreme Court ruled in his favor. Thank you, First Liberty Institute. Well done, Leah. Well done, everyone there. We're grateful for you guys. Before we get to that case, though, what has been, give us a nice little overview of the last maybe 70 years or so of the Supreme Court's interpretation of the First Amendment and the Congress shall not make any laws respecting the establishment of religion. What does that really mean, or how did the court interpret that?
Well, the past 70 years or so have seen a lot of development in what that means. So I'd say for about the past 50 years, the court interpreted the Establishment Clause under the Lemon versus Kurtzman test. So what that said is that the Establishment Clause prohibited the government from appearing to endorse religion. And if it made someone feel uncomfortable that they, if they saw a cross-shaped memorial that they had an objection to, then they could file a lawsuit and say that the government was endorsing religion. Okay, well, in the Coach Kennedy case, the Supreme Court at last rejected that test and said that that's not actually how we interpret what an establishment of religion is. Instead, what we do in court is we go back and look at the history and tradition of the founders and see what did they understand an establishment of religion to be. And in that context, they're talking about, the founders were looking at, the federal government coming in and establishing an actual church. That's what they were concerned about. That's what the Establishment Clause prohibits. What the Establishment Clause does not prohibit is a teacher or a coach praying on their own time. And that's what the court held in the Coach Kennedy case.
Oh, so good and so clear. The clear difference, you would think, between establish a religion and, would you say, seemingly endorse one. Those are clearly completely different things. I'm glad the court's finally drawing that proper distinction. Lucas, I want to get your perspective here as a pastor and how this, let's say, misunderstanding of the true meaning of separation of church and state, how that has affected our culture over all these years. How has it affected the church? How has this legal perversion affected the church over all these years?
So let me maybe put a little bit of a spin on this. As much as the left talks about the separation of church and state, I believe at the end of the day, what they really want is not the separation of church and state, but they want a church that's subservient to the state. They want a church that will bow down, that will do what it's told, that will agree with them on every single issue. And, they're just not going to get that from Bible-believing Christians, in America. And so I think that as Christians, we have to recognize that, yes, that there should be a separation of church and state in the sense that the state should never be able to tell the church what to do. But I do believe that the church should always be close enough to the state in order to be her conscience. And I think that that's really what it means about being a good kind of citizen of this world, as well as a citizen of the kingdom of God in this country.
Really well said. What is it going to look like, Lucas, when the government, and correct me, maybe I'm way off here, maybe I'm going too far, when the government says, churches, you must sanction same-sex marriage? Is that a thing that could potentially come? Or the government says, we're no longer going to give you tax-exempt status unless you do this?
Look, if tyranny, flourishes, there's any of those things can come. That's always a risk, when tyranny is allowed to continue. Fortunately, right now we're just on the early phases of that, but it's enough that I think it should wake up most of us to go, look, we don't like the direction that this is going. I think we have a lot of examples in church history of times where the state has tried to dictate things to churches for them to do, and ultimately it usually doesn't go well for the church in the sense that persecution ensues. But, as I think it was Tertullian, said that the death of the martyr is the seed of the church. And so, if it comes down to persecution, you're just going to see Christianity spread even more so as people stand up for their faith. So I hope it doesn't come like that. But either way, we're ready for it.
Separation of church and state. You know, it's not in the Constitution, it's not in the Declaration of Independence. Where did that term come from? It actually is before Thomas Jefferson. We need to understand this. Why? Because we live in a pagan culture, and the pagan church is imposing their morals and values on you. And if you try to do anything about it, oh, there's a separation of church and state. It's like, no. You guys got that completely backwards. Abortion, gay marriage, transgender kids, what is going on? We need to fully understand the true meaning of separation of church and state. It's the opposite of what they tell you it is. That is on our special right now, Separation Church and State, available on our app, the First TV app. You can download that on any app store and at thefirsttv.com.